It is what it is. Okay, we are live here, Purpose and Practice. Welcome back to another show. This is a show where we focus on those people out in our community who are doing extraordinary things, giving back and doing the right thing and making sure that they are doing their part in terms of moving the community forward. Remember, the purpose of the show is purpose and practice. So we like to, get to know more about, what folks do in their everyday practice, and how it is purpose driven and how it brings change to their community. So I am your host, Dr. Rawls Dill. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully you all are doing well. And today we have, we got another game changer, Jessenia Reivera, she's out in the world doing really, really great things. I cannot begin to tell you how proud I am of her. I've been watching her transcend and just move beyond, going all the way back from when I first met her in high school and coaching her in basketball. And I tell you, she was short, but the energy and the attitude that she brought onto the court, it was like, people had to recognize, you know what I'm saying? And that is when I saw in her, I saw a lot, I saw leadership. I saw someone who had drive. I saw someone who was counted out, okay, and made sure that she always represented herself in the best way possible. And that was one of the things that, I took away from my relationship with her when she was younger. And now what I see her doing in the community with her community organization, which I'm going to let her talk a lot about and talk more about, I'm really not surprised because, like I said, I saw it back then, when she was a young lady. And, with that said, Jessenia, how are you feeling? What's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me on this podcast. But I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. When I reached out, we've been back and forth. Jessenia and I have been back and forth, I would say, over like maybe the last year or so. We were, you were making some career moves and you had reached out, for some advice in terms of some career moves that you were making, then getting your master's. Like you were on the move. And every time I look on social media, I was seeing like posts and pictures of things that, you were doing in the community to give back. So why don't you just start us off by like giving the people a little background based on your organization and what you're doing now.
Well, I started the Prosper Foundation about 3 years ago. But before that, we were working in the community. And a lot of the stuff that we just do, we like to give back. And we want to be active members in our community. I started the foundation with the intention to give back, but also provide a service, which is a mental health service for the kids in our community. Because as you mentioned, when I was in grad school, I noticed that there was like a big gap of services. And even if you were to do like your own research now, you would see that there's just not a lot of services for kids who are suffering from a mental health disorder or illness, whether it's anxiety or depression. There's a gap. And so we wanted to fill that gap. And that's how really Prosper got started, because we need to take care of our community. And it starts with the mental health.
Indeed. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Prosper. But before we get into that, I kind of want to go back because I think, like, I know for me personally, and I can't speak for you, and we'll let you tell your story. A lot of what drove me to be, who I have become as an educator, as a mentor, as a person, was built upon what I felt I needed as a child myself. So I kind of took that as a blueprint to be like, all right, I want my life about providing to young people what I felt I needed as a young person. So can you take us back and just kind of give us a little bit of background on you growing up, where you grew up, what growing up was like?
So I grew up in Long Branch, born and raised in Long Branch. I always lived on Liberty. And back then, I mean, my mom was a single mom, so she worked very, very hard. And a lot of the times I just wanted to do that. Like, I wanted to be just like my mom. I wanted to hustle it and get that money and stuff like that. So she really was like a role model for me in that sense, that like whatever you wanted to get, you can get. You just got to put the work in. But throughout middle school and throughout high school, like I just noticed what I was really missing was like that, just another adult support, to be like, hey, do this or do that or do it this way. I felt like a lot of the time I had to figure things out on my own. And so early in childhood, I was doing a lot of things, and I wouldn't listen to a lot of adult advice and things like that. So I wish that I would have listened more. But I really had to figure out a lot of things, I feel like, on my own. And not to say that I didn't have supports, but when adults are working and working and working, that time is missing. That presence is missing.
That, touching on that, people in the chat giving a shout out to Liberty Street. Definitely shout out to Liberty Street and all our folks out in Long Branch, period. That part about like people listening, and people kind of being able to see and identify that gap. I think that that's a big part of what's missing, in terms of when we go to school for education. A lot of time is not, whether it's to be a teacher, whether it's to be a counselor, a lot of time is not spent on trying to identify marginalized and vulnerable groups and doing work with those specific groups. Can you talk to, like your experiences in school in terms of, do you feel that people, and when I say school now, let's go back to you coming up, through the school system, in your city. Did you connect with, folks? And if you did, when did it happen in your schooling career? Did it happen early on? Did it happen in the middle years? Did it happen in later years at all?
I feel like I really started to connect with mentors and teachers when I went to college. I feel like when I was in middle school, I felt like I didn't have like a lot of connections with a lot of my teachers. And I feel like in middle school, like I went through my own things with like mental health, and I felt like that wasn't even really a thing back then. Like, and then when I was in high school, I did connect with some teachers. Miss Mahler, I think she changed her name at this point, but she was one of the teachers that I really, really, really connected with. I've always struggled with math. And she really just brought it to light for me. Like she helped me out when I needed it. She really stood out for me as a teacher. And then when I went on to college, I've met so many great people, especially in my grad school years. But I felt like what was really missing was just that connection and that representation. I think that that's super important. And, when I did have like my struggles with certain teachers, it was just like, there was no relatability. There was no understanding. And that gap, created that, well, I don't think that I can go to this person to talk about what I'm going through because they're focusing on my defects. And what I really need is just to learn how to do this. And I felt like, in middle school, I didn't get that. And in high school, until I met Miss Mahler, that piece was missing for me.
Wow. It's so much I want to unwrap what you just said, but you talked about adults focusing on defects, in a lot of research in terms of education, that's often referred to as deficit thinking. Is when we see things and we look at young people and we immediately look at or think of the deficit, the thing that they're not coming to the table with, rather than building the relationship around the positive things that they bring to the table. That mental health piece, you touched on the fact that back then it kind of wasn't a thing, and I agree. I think that it was a thing, but it wasn't seen as a thing that was impacting our children. And I think that there's a lot more focus on it now. Did you have, you talked about Miss Mahler, and you talked about her positive, impact that she had on you, even in a subject that you weren't really strong in. She still had
Yeah,
that, positive impact on you, which is great. But in terms of the mental health, did you know you were struggling with mental health then, or do you look back now at what you know and say, "Wow, I was struggling"?
That's a good question. I don't know if I was able to identify that it was depression or if it was anxiety. What I was able to identify was that it was affecting me because I didn't want to do schoolwork, or I wasn't as involved, or my mood would change frequently. So I didn't know the label, I didn't know the name, but I knew that something was like happening.
And did you have any way back then? Did you have anyone that you would talk to or talk through any of these things with, or was it something that you kind of like, all right, I got to deal with that?
For the most part, I felt like I had to deal with it on my own, but I did use the school-based services for a little bit. But again, I felt like there just wasn't a connection there. I felt like this person in front of me can't relate to what I'm going through because it doesn't seem like she went through what I'm going through right now, or she didn't grow up in the same neighborhoods that I did. So there was just that disconnect.
Wow. So, and you talked about school-based, in school-based, I don't know how you would define it, but the way that I remember it, and I guess a good way to define it is it's a support and resource mechanism within the school setting with counselors who are there and who are able to help young people kind of navigate, through different experiences that they're going through in adolescence. Would you agree that that's how school-based basically you would define it?
Yeah.
So that was a resource that you did use, but you're saying that like it really wasn't that real connection there. It was kind of missing.
Yeah, that connection, and it's important in therapy. Like now, as I do therapy, it's important to establish a connection and to also be relatable in some sense. You don't have to relate in every sense, but I felt like that piece was missing for me when I was going to see the social worker at the school.
Okay. And that's high school, right?
Yes.
We're talking high school now. So from high school, when do you realize like, all right, I want to go to college? Like, because you're talking to me about what you're telling me, I can easily see a young person saying, I got too much going on. I'll never be able to handle college, so how did that like come to be?
My mom, I'm a first generation college student. So she really, really wanted me to go to college. She wanted to make sure that I did it, no, by any means. So that really pushed me to go to college. And when I got to college, I gotta be honest, I felt so unprepared, so unprepared. The environment was different. Growing up in Long Branch, it's a very diverse community. When I went away to Pennsylvania, it was like such a culture shock for me. So not only being in a different setting, but also like not feeling prepared for college. My first semester, I actually failed the class, and it was like devastating. But I knew that I had to keep going, and I actually stayed there for 2 years, and then I came back to Kane and finished my bachelor's and my master's there.
So in Pennsylvania, where'd you go?
Lock Haven University.
And how'd that come about?
The school fair, the
Okay.
college fair at the school. Yep.
Okay. So you took advantage of that college fair.
I did.
Yeah, that's good. I have to say, I used to use it as a time to get out of class, but I didn't take good advantage of it as I should have. And I know a lot of my friends, we used to use it just as a pass to get out of a certain class. But it's good that you did, because I'm like, yo, Pennsylvania, I didn't realize you went to Lock Haven. And when you went there, did you originally start off with the counseling track? Is that like what you were interested in?
I did not. I actually started with a political science major. I wanted to be a lawyer. And I felt like I would have been really good at it too. But when
Uh-huh.
I first, the general education courses, I took psychology my first semester of college, and I really was so intrigued, and I was like, man, like this is something like that I felt like that I kind of went through. Like I never heard of this subject.
Hmm.
And so I got really, really indulged in that. And then when I took my second course in psychology, to find out about emotional disorders, I was like, yeah, this is what I
Mm.
want to do. And then I started reflecting, like, man, why wasn't this available to me when I was in high school or
Mm.
even middle school? So that's what really started my track, and from there it's just I hit the ground running.
So you end up from Lock Haven. You come for your last 2 years at Keene for your undergrad, you said?
Yep.
So you do your 2 years at undergrad at Keene, and then you go and get your master. Like, did you know all the way? Like, I'm going for my master's, or did it come after you finish your bachelor's? Did you?
It came,
How'd that come about?
it came after. I actually spent a lot of time working in the field with my bachelor's, but I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do with just my bachelor's. So I
Mm.
went back for my master's in 2016. So I was out of school for about 4 years and 5 years before I went back for my graduate degree.
So what prompted you? Was it really just hitting dead end jobs? Like, what was it?
I sat down and had a conversation with somebody that used to work with my mom, and he told me, he was like, what's your biggest concern about going back to school? I was like, well, I'm already in a lot of debt, so I don't want to get in more debt. And he was like, go back and get your master's degree and worry about the debt later. And so since that conversation, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And that's how it came to fruition.
So you just re-enrolled into Keene University, got your master's, and what is your master's in?
Counseling.
School counseling. Is it school
uh,
counseling or just
it's master's in counseling, but I also have a school counseling certification.
okay? All right. So during that time, were there any times that you were like, you felt, you know what, I'm done with this. I can't do it. I'm dropping out. Like, I'm leaving. Like, were there any, even your undergrad, because you did something that, to be honest, a lot of statistics show when young folks transfer from one school to another, the percentages of them not finishing their degree go up high.
Hmm.
So you did that transfer, and obviously you still maintain. But did you ever reach a point where you were like, I'm good on school, like I'm throwing in the
Yeah,
books?
that first semester was honestly very, very, very tough for me. It was a very hard transition from high school to college for me. So that, like I mentioned earlier, that first semester I failed a art history class. I don't even know why I was taking an art history class, but I had no guidance in regards to how to pick classes, because that first semester of college they pick the classes for you. I didn't pick my
Hmm.
classes. So I had no idea how to navigate that. And so then, once you get an F or like a withdrawal in college, it pretty much like damages your GPA. So my second semester, I got straight A's, and then I noticed that my GPA was still like a 2.8. I was like, I'm never gonna get into any other school if I don't get this GPA up. So at that point, I was like, you know what? Maybe it's not for me. I don't want to do it anymore. And I really can't think about the moment that I was like, you know what, just keep going. But I did. And my whole point of transferring to Keene was, okay, if I go to Keene, my GPA will start over. That doesn't transfer. I know I'm a good student. So that was really like the final decision making for me to transfer and focus on that GPA. And I did. I graduated with like a 3.8, and it was a big
Wow.
difference from a 2.8.
Listen, with my undergrad, I was in the land of the twos. I'm just letting you know. I was under three. I still think back, I don't know how I finished my undergrad. Um, but it's like, it's so much going on in us just as young people during that time, if we are traditional students and we go to college right after high school, there's a lot of maturing and there's a lot of things changing in us. And I was, like you said, you weren't ready. I was not. I was kind of skating through. And you know what's funny? I failed some kind of art class too. And it was like I kind of went into it thinking it was going to be like, I'll be drawing and doing things, sketching. But then it was like this whole history part of it. And I was like, I had to study and I had to learn all of these different movements. So it kind of like that class I failed and it put me, and you're right. And this, this goes out to all of you who are just entering into college, that one F, what it does to your GPA is like crazy, like, and I remember I was on academic probation after my first two semesters because I had failed two courses to be honest. I had failed the art course and I had failed an algebra course. And then that's when I started understanding I really have to study, and I really, so I had that moment of like, all right, I got to get my act together, or they're going to kick me off of off of this campus. And it was support systems that helped keep me in. I had friends who were in college that motivated me because I didn't want to be the one who ended up back home. I had older friends who had finished college, so that motivated me. Like you, I was a first year, or not first year, first generation college student in my immediate family. And I think I was third in my family as I know it. But my mom and my dad, they didn't check my grades or anything like that. I was just kind of going. And I'm saying that to ask you this. Did you have support systems in place that kind of helped you, just in general? Like what was your support systems? What were they like?
So when I was in Lock Haven, I was very fortunate to meet this guy named Sammy, and I still know him to this day. Shout out to Sammy. My second year, I moved off of campus, and he lived right next door to me. And he would absolutely make sure that I was up for class. We would pull all-nighters in the library. Like, he was really my support system when I was over there in Lock Haven. So shout out to him, because now that I think about it, he's the reason that I kept going, because he would wake me up for class. He would be like, oh, we got to study for this test and things like that. So that support was like everything. Being 4 hours away from home, yes, I could always call my mom and things like that, but I felt like also there was some things that she wouldn't understand in regards to like the school system, what I'm going through, the studying, everything is hard. And I also had some friends out there. Zoe, she was also a very good friend to me, and that support at college like is what got me through those 2 years there.
So what would be your message to young people, in terms of building support systems, and how to go about building them?
I think the most important thing to do when you are at college is be open to meeting new people, be open to experiencing new things, and going to those like events that they host on the campus, like networking in that way, because it is very important, for people who are going to college for the first time. You know, you want to have you're used to having your support from home, right? But things change when you go over there. Once you go away, you start talking to friends less. You start speaking with your family less, and so it's important to go to those events and really put yourself out there. Everybody's not going to be your best friend, but in times of need, people are going to be there if you put yourself out there.
I think that's really good advice, Jessenia. That's something I struggle with, because I was like, coming from Long Branch, I went up to Jersey City. That's where I went to school, and I kind of was like trying to stay to myself. I wasn't getting involved in things. And once I started, and it's funny because I started to get involved with more things through going to tutoring, because then I started meeting other people who were in kind of similar situations. So we started connecting, and that's kind of how I started to build like friends, believe it or not. Another thing that helped me was going through EOF. I don't, and you couldn't have gone through EOF because you went out of state, but I went through EOF, and that's, for those of you who don't know, is referred to as an Educational Opportunity Fund, and it is specifically for like those first generation college students, students who are living in poverty, students who don't have the greatest grades, and there's like an academic fund attached to that. And we did a lot of things together as a group through that EOF program that really helped. So let's fast forward a little bit,
Hmm.
because the work I had Mr. Encore on, he was my first guest. Jerome Hill, right? And your name came up in that conversation because I was asking him about giving back, and how he gave back and what some moments he was proud of. And he had talked about a moment that I was already familiar with because I had saw it, I think, on your social media. But it was in Asbury Park, and there was like in the community center, there were a bunch of young children there, and he had like the beat machine there. He was like teaching them how to like make beats. They were doing all of this stuff, and that was a program, as he mentioned in the show, that was developed by
Mhm.
you. Tell us a little bit about the organization, and what you all are doing, and what kind of realities you're bringing to people and communities.
So that was during our summer program. Shout out to Mr. Encore because the kids still talk about that song that they made till this day. Um, that is our summer program. So we started a summer program last year that really focuses on like the social emotional learning, but also like raising self awareness, self esteem. So we put the kids through a 6 week program, and each lesson is focused on like a communication skill or a social skill. So the first part of the program initially is an hour and a half, and we have the kids sitting in the group. And at first the kids didn't really like it, but once they started to open up and talk with each other, and mind you, the kids are 8 to 9 years old, so they're opening up and they're talking. So for that first hour, then we give them like a 30-minute break, but then we also engage in STEAM activities: the
Okay.
science, uh, science, technology, engineering, art, math, and science. uh,
Yep, you got it.
so we engage them in those kind of activities because I also know how important that educational piece is. And they go hand in hand. If a child or a student is feeling good mentally, they're going research suggests that they're going to excel academically. So I wanted to merge those two pieces because they're two important pieces for me. So we ran the summer program last year, and then we also just finished last Tuesday our second year of the summer program.
So are you doing that? Is that a nonprofit?
Yes.
So that's a so how did you begin a nonprofit?
Whew. I put a lot of my own money into it.
Well, here's why let me say this. Um, I confession, I've started trying to nonprofit, fell off the wagon, the work got too much with everything else that I was doing, stopped.
mm,
You know, I think a lot of folks are out there who would love to hear, like, how did you, the process that you went through, because what you just talked about through that nonprofit and those students, and that was in Asbury Park, I believe,
mhm,
when you did that, right? Was that year? So those students, those young people are still talking about that experience. So
mhm.
you obviously have made an impact. But tell us, like, how does one, or how did you go through that process of starting it?
So I knew that I wanted to do something. So what I did the research. I did a lot of research. I started to also look at a lot of nonprofits, like their models and things like that. And so I figured out how to, contact. I had to contact the state and obviously register with them and things like that. But I also had to find people who were willing to go on this journey with me, and I have to like really thank my board members and the people that came together with me and were like, okay, we're gonna do this with you. Like we see your vision, and we're gonna follow it through. So once I spoke to them about it, like we just got the moving parts. Now with a nonprofit, you have to raise money, right? And that's something that I was not familiar in. So again, like I did the research, and I think our first fundraiser with was what was with Lala's Gourmet Cookies and Brick,
Okay.
and it went so well. Like it went so well. So from that initial fundraiser, we were able to raise like a good amount of money, and that like really pushed us forward. I think, to be honest, that fundraiser raised us about $1,200, and that's unheard of, for the first time. So that really pushed us to start. And then we had a connection with Jack's. We did a fundraiser at Jack's shortly after that. And then after that, we ran the cookie fundraiser one more time. So those three fundraisers really is what built our foundation until now. And because of the money that we raised from those three events, we were able to do the summer program last year and this year.
So, a lot of shout outs right now in the chat for Prosper Foundation. And I always see the pictures on social media of all of the things that you all are doing, and all of the work that you're putting into the community. And you talked about your board members.
Hmm.
So, how did you form that? Were those folks that you were just naturally already connected to, or did you build new relationships with those folks?
So everybody that sits on my board, I've known for more than 10 years.
Okay.
They are people that I grew up with. They're people that I trust. They're people that I know will tell me, no, this is a bad idea, because you can't have people who are just going to yes you to death.
So
So,
true.
and that's something that I'm actually really proud of, that I was able to build this with my friends, and I always say, like, giving back with my friends, like making that a trend, because if you have people in your corner that believe in you and believe that you can do it, like, you're just going to skyrocket. And so my board members all are in different backgrounds. We have business owners, we have people who work in sales, we have people who have worked with the public housing for a long time. So all of those different backgrounds really help build us to where we are now. So shout out to those board members. Shout out to Shad, Jen,
Hmm.
Alvin, Lisa, Camilla. I couldn't be more grateful for them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of familiar faces. When I see the pictures, I'm like, wow, and it makes me think of like, all right, if you were, and now I'm asking you, right, in high school, if we were creating courses that taught young folks how to do things like create a LLC, create a nonprofit, do you think that's a reality in terms of, or a possibility, should I say? Because it's not a reality right now in most
Yeah.
schools. Is it a possibility? Like, do you see that being something that you could have learned in high school?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there should be classes like that. I think that they should teach financial literacy too. Um, if there was like back in high school, if there was a class that would have taught me how to start my business straight out of high school, I think so many people would take advantage of that, because it's not something that is second, like, it's not something that's natural, right? Who would have thought? Like, I would have never thought in high school that I would have a nonprofit right now. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, it was a foreign idea to me. So if there were courses that taught children or kids, adults, how to do this, like, more people would do it.
And that's just it. Is that all right? In high school, there are business management classes. There are economic classes, but I wonder if they really get to like grassroots, like like this is how you start grassroots, because a lot of the things that are taught in those business and economic classes, a lot of theoretical work, but I'm really like saying, yo, straight up, how do we start a nonprofit? How can I right now leave this building and begin to work to start a nonprofit, or to start an LLC? I think that that's missing.
Hmm.
Because I think a lot of educators out there will say right now, well, we do have business management, we have economics, but I guess what's missing is like that grassroots type of course.
Yeah, like
you
that
know,
hands-on experience. You know,
yes.
teach me how to fill out this document so that I don't have to resend it again. Things like that. Teach me how to research this and what I would need to have in place. To do that, because we can teach theory and history, but it's different when you actually get out there and do it.
And you're doing the actual work. That, because like right now with like even that supply chain, like that's a big deal right now, right? Supply chain management. And I'm like, how many high schools are teaching about something like supply chain management, and how you get, like, even what we're doing right now, like the fact that I can have this broadcast going and I'm going like right from my home and your
Hmm.
home to the people, and there's no in between. So the supply chain is me, the supplier, right to the
Hmm.
people. You know what I'm saying? Like there's like 20 years ago, there would have been so many loops that we would have had to jump through in order to have a broadcast. Like we would have to be. So I guess it's the same way we have to start looking at things like, business, starting a business, starting a nonprofit, these grassroots things, and we have to find a way to get it into high schools. Have you had any, or even middle schools? Forget about high schools. I think you could start this work with middle school students. Have you had the opportunity to speak at any high school or any middle school about like some of your experiences?
I got the opportunity to speak with Mama's regional high school students. They were in a mindfulness class. So we had the opportunity to speak to them about like what we had going on and things, and they actually helped us fundraise, which was like amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a shout out to Miss Nappy. She really brought us in there and she helped us fundraise. But we didn't get to talk about how to do it, right? We talked
Mhm.
about all the services that we offer, what we're trying to do in the community, and the community service opportunities that we offer as well. But we didn't have a chance yet to like really go in and be like, this is how I started it, this is who I started it with, and this is how you can do it too.
Because I asked you that, Jessenia, because I'm thinking right now, right? I've had Mr. Encore on the show, right? I had Aramith Tremar on the show. I had Takira on the show, right?
Hmm.
I got you on the show, and I'm not going to say who's next week's guest is, but when I think about those folks, I'm like, yo, if I was in high school and my teacher brought in for 4 months, right, one of you each month to talk about the things that you were doing and the how that you did it, that would have blown me away.
Yeah.
Like that would have been more meaningful to me than any course that I can remember from high school.
Hmm.
Because each of you, in your own way, whether it was entrepreneurial, whether it was through the arts, like you were like showing and proving that, you know, you can come in this world and you can create something that the people need and the people are going to support you for that. And I'm like, that's those are the kind of things that our young people, they need to hear. Those are the stories that they need to hear. So if schools, let's say, because right now my podcast, I'm creating it because I'm like, the reason I created this, and a big shout out to Mr. Encore for inspiring me through his beat challenge, because I was like, I got to do
Hmm.
something. So, but a big reason for doing this is that I want to be able to take 20 episodes and go to a school district and say, all right, listen to these episodes and find a way to fit it into your curriculum. Find a way to get these folks into the lives of your students. Like I imagine you going back to Long Branch and speaking to those students, speaking to the community about your experiences and about how you transcended and you overcame what you had to overcome. You created something that can build community. So if folks wanted to reach out and get in contact with you, how would they do that to do that kind of work?
So they would, I mean, we have the Prosper Foundation on Instagram, we have the Prosper Foundation on Facebook. We also have our contact information there. So if anybody were to want to reach out, they are absolutely able to. And I would love to do something like that. I would love to go back to Long Branch and speak to a lot of the students because I was once in that seat too. I was one
Hmm.
feeling like I don't know what I'm gonna do like in 10 years from now. And 10 years went by and here we are. So I would love to do that.
So I wanna kind of like change lanes a little bit,
All right.
and I want to talk about some of the things that make you go. And when I say make you go and what motivates you and what keeps you inspired, um, I know we all have our little things that inspire us and that keep us moving, because you're doing difficult work. What are some of the things, that inspire you and keep you on the track that you're on?
Well, I think anytime that I sit down and have a conversation with somebody and they tell me, thank you for just spending this time and speaking with me, like that right there is everything. Like for you to tell me that like just the time that we spent together changed maybe the outcome of your day, like, that keeps me going. And also knowing that there's like so much more work to do. Not every day, I feel like I'm on go, go, go. But when I don't feel that way, I have people in my corner. They're like, listen, you're doing important work. You have to do it. Like there's people who depend on you, and there's people that still need to experience you. So that really just keeps me going. And when I think about the Prosper Foundation, like my vision is so clear. Like I want to have a community center, whether I would love to have it in Long Branch. That would be the dream come true. But I really want to have like a center where kids can come and you don't have to like sit down for counseling. You don't have to speak about mental health, but just to have a space to go to where there's no pressure. I'm just going to go here and I might be able to tap into some creative things. I might be able to meet with like a graphic designer or an artist or somebody like Mr. Encore, a producer, like just to have those resources in our community, because when kids connect with adult, like a supportive adult, it changes so much. Like it changes the trajectory. So like that keeps me going. Like knowing that that's not done makes me go.
So, what you just said, and it's funny because a lot of research in education says that it's not all about the teachers that are assigned to teach students, but it says that if students have meaningful relationships with two teachers outside of the teachers that they're assigned to, their likelihood of school success like goes it almost doubles.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that connection piece is really, really important, in connecting with adults and adults being able to connect with students and young people. I always say that, education and relationships are a two-way street. There's sometimes where folks get into education and they think that it's about creating, oh, this is my world, I'm in
Mm-hmm.
charge. But it's important to develop those relationships that you're talking about, to be able to look at young people just as that, as young people, not as kids, but as young people who have ideas and dreams and visions. Speaking of that, how would you, if you had to go back and give yourself advice, right? This is Jessenia Now Today on the 23rd of August, 2020, going back, giving Jessenia advice from Jessenia in high school. What would the advice or what would the message be to the high school you?
Really, it would be to listen to the people that were trying to guide me, and I kind of was like, nah, I'm gonna do this my way. So my advice really would be to listen and to see what you can take. You don't have to always take everything from a conversation. You can take some of it from the conversation. So I would tell my younger self to listen, just to listen.
But do you think that you had to listen somewhere?
Yeah.
Like, you talked a lot about your mom, like your mom was like pushing, pushing, pushing. But a lot of it was, and this is how I feel about my mom, and then I'm gonna ask you your feelings, is that my mom didn't always say a lot, but what I watched her do was like really impactful.
Hmm.
Like she wasn't like, sit down, let's have a talk. But what I watched her do, you know, taking care of me and my brother, dealing with demons that she had to deal with and challenges that she had to overcome personally, and going through that, that was a great motivator, to me. So when you say listen, do you really mean only just listening with your ears? Or do you mean really also like seeing things, or kind of like, observing things differently?
Yeah, yeah. Observing things differently and really being open to that wisdom that uh, older people have to share with you. I think that like I was listening to okay, yeah, I hear you, but I'm not
Hmm.
actually listening to what you're saying. And so I feel like as now where I am now, if I would have maybe listened more or even experienced more, like gone to, different events and things when I was younger, I think that would, like, that's what I would say, just indulge more, get connected with more people, uh, and take care of yourself. That's what I would high school version.
And I think that those things are important. So going forward, like, where do you see? And I don't like asking that question, like, your 5 year plan, or like, where you see yourself in 10 years, or anything like that. But do you have any? Do you have your eye on anything in terms of, what, that's where I'm trying to go with it. Like, this is where I want, Prosper to be.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like I really want that community wellness center. Like I want to have that. But if I'm being real, like I want that in every like underprivileged community like in America. Like if there was a center that provided mental health services, recreational services, just uh arts and
Hmm.
crafts, like resources like that, like it would just, I would love to see that. Like I would love to see that. So I mean, it's not far off, but that's what I would like to see. Like, I want that wellness center. I want kids to have a space that they can go to in every community so that they don't feel like they're alone, because suicide is the second leading cause of death in children and adolescents. Like, so that speaks a lot. Like, the kids are dying more by suicide than car accidents. Like, that has to change. That has to
True. True. And I'm glad you touched on that. This the suicide piece. It's funny because I was listening to, like, because my daughter is going into seventh grade next year, so I'm trying to understand, because it's been a long time since I've been a seventh grader. So I'm trying to understand. And a seventh grader now is different than a seventh grader than that I was back in, what, 19, maybe 88, right? So what I'm trying to understand is, with her, I'm like, I'm trying to understand your world,
change.
right? So one of the things that I started to do is I just listened to her playlists. I listened to her music.
Hmm.
And that sounds like, okay, but I'm listening to Juice World, right? And because that's a lot of our kids are tuned
Hmm.
in to Juice World. And, like, I think he has a song called Anxiety, right? And I'm listening to it, and I'm like, yo, his music was about, like, these emotions that he had inside, and his way of letting it out. And I'm like, I'm listening, I'm like, okay, the more I listen, the more I start seeing for me, what a Tupac may have been for me. And my daughter, she's all over this music, and it almost allowed me to start having conversations with her about things like anxiety, and, like, and understanding that there's a world that she's experiencing that may be different than my world. So how do you stay? I'm saying that to ask you, as a counselor, as someone who is trained in counseling, how do you, if you had to give advice to parents, to guardians, to educators, in terms of staying in tune with young people, how, what kind of advice would you give them, or give us? Because I'm one of those folks. I'm trying to stay in tune.
Yeah, I would really tell them to listen, and to really have those like mental health check-ins, asking them how their day was, and I always, like, what I've been saying more to people recently is like, we're going through this pandemic, right? And as adults, we have learned to adapt. But
Hmm.
think about kids who have literally been pulled from the structures that they know.
Yes.
Are we checking in with them? Did we ask them, how are you feeling about going back to school? How have you felt over these last 3 months? And like really sitting there to listen, because they have a lot of things to say. But we get so caught up like in working or just being busy that we forget about that piece. It's important to just sit down and have that conversation with them. Like, how have you been experiencing this? What has your experience been like over the last 4 months? And I'm sure that they will have a lot to say. When I first opened the summer program this year, the first question that I asked them was, "How are you guys doing with all this?" And again, they're 8, 9 years old, but they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to school," or "I just want to see my friends. I just want to see my teachers. I don't like being home all the time." So like they're experiencing some of the same things that we are, but it's a little more intense for them. Their world is like upside down right now. So I think it's really important to just have those mental health check-ins and sit down and take 30 minutes, an hour out of your day to be like, let's talk. Let's talk about how you're feeling.
That's real because what the hard part is, Jessenia, is that, and you touched on it, some of the adults are dealing with so much stress of their own.
Hmm.
Like I was just reading this morning that the in September, by the end of September, the amount of homelessness that's going to impact students
Hmm.
and families is going to be greater than it's been in over 20 years, right? So I'm like, how are folks going to worry about school? With this homelessness and this joblessness as a reality, So when it, like, how do I get what you're saying, talk to them, but I almost want to I want you to give me a message right now to put you on a spot, but I want you to, Jessenia, I want you, and I know you can do it, talk to the adults in terms of some of the things that we are going through as adults that takes our attention away from our kids because we're so focused on survival.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, give us a message for the parents out there, the guardians out there. What can we do? The educators.
I think it's important to be self-aware. Be more self-aware when you are going through, something like a bout with anxiety or a bout with depression. Really taking the time to take care of yourself. There's always that quote that you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't
Mm.
be there for a child if you're not right yourself. So it really takes, I'm very, very big on self-care, and I have to shout out my graduate program because that is something that they pushed for us. It's like make sure that you're self-care, self-care, self-care. So I would definitely tell the adults, listen, pay attention to what your body is telling you, pay attention to the emotions that you're having, and really start to take care of that stuff. Because how you cope is how your kids learn to cope as well. So if you're stressed out and you're going to your room to lay down every time that you're stressed out, children are watching that. So
Mm.
it's really important to take care of yourself and also to practice like that self awareness. Okay, today I'm not having a great day, but I felt like this for the last 5 days. What do I have to do differently? Um, so I really think it's important to have that self awareness and also just learning about what it is. Like, what is mental health? What is depression? What is anxiety? And really educating yourself and your children because that's an opportunity to do that. When you know more about this, you're able to relay that information. So really checking in with yourself. A thing that I always recommend, and some people, they don't really like it, but I think journaling is super, super, super important. Um, and one quote that I always remember is like journaling is about learning about the story that you're creating for yourself. Because when you sit down and actually reflect on some of those thoughts that you have, you're like, wow, why do I even think this way about myself, or why am I saying this? And really start to challenge some of those thoughts that you're having. Because journaling is about finding out, okay, this story, I don't like this. I'm going to change this narrative. So really beginning to change the narrative for yourself.
Listen, thank you. I knew you could do it. That's why I was like, listen, she go ahead. Listen, I put you on the spot. You deliver, as I knew you would. That journaling piece is, it's like, it makes me think of like when I taught, journals were a big part of my class. It was to the point where every year I would make sure students got those black and white me
Hmm.
journals, and if they couldn't get them, I would get them, and it's funny because I got a box of them right here
You know what? I
because
have a box right here too.
because listen, and because what I'm trying to do is get my children to understand the importance of what you just said and the importance of journaling, the importance of, and I'm gonna go back to what DMX said, writing our pain,
Hmm.
and when he was on verses, because that stuck to me. And it's funny because in terms of hip hop music, when I think of DMX, he was one of the first artists that I recall of really coming out and talking about mental illness, talking about depression, talking about
Hmm.
demons, you know, to where it kind of made others feel like, all right, it's not a weakness. It's something that I'm going through. And the way we shield it may be through alcoholism. It may be through drug abuse. It may be through locking ourselves in a room and sleeping all day. Like you kind of talked about coping.
Hmm.
But then if we reframe it, like DMX said, and write our pain, write this stuff down. Listen, that changes the whole
Yeah.
game. That so what you just put out there, it's like, and shout out to Aaron for remembering, like, because those journals is serious. It sounds, because I remember I read something. It was like writing is something where you take your thoughts and you make them three-dimensional because you put them down on paper. You make them something that people can touch and feel. And that, like, when I read that, I said, yo, that's deep. So when I start asking young people, like, write, and then on Fridays, I would collect all the journals and read them, that's when I started to develop. So, teachers out there, if you're saying, well, how do I learn or how do I know? The things that students would write in journals,
Yeah.
it changed my whole perspective on, like, really getting to know people, So you really nailed that, and thank you for that.
Yeah. And
So go
when
ahead.
the one important piece is that that's what we teach in our program is like that is a coping strategy. So any kid that comes to our program, they get a journal. And they're like, "What am I supposed to do with this? Write about your day, write about anything, and even drawing. It's super important, and that's also like where the back to school drive becomes important to me because I'll have 100 notebooks, and any kid that I come in contact with here's a notebook because I just know how important it is to be able to release. And how you said, yeah, it becomes three-dimensional. So a lot of things with anxiety, we might be thinking things like I'm not good enough. So you put that on paper, and guess what? You cross it out, and you write I am good enough,
Oh, I like that.
and
I
you
like
change
that.
that thought.
I like, listen, I got a big smile on my face. Like, I'm like, because I'm thinking, Jessenia, I'm sorry, but I'm thinking of you on the basketball court, like, yay big, yay tall, putting in work. And I'm like, the same kind of tenacity, the same type of drive that you had there, you have now refocused to here.
Hmm.
And as an educator, I'm listening to this and thinking of how can I change what I do? And how can I work with other educators to make sure we're infusing these kind of practices rather into what we do for children. So you have inspired me, and I want the folks that I bring on this show are folks who inspire me, and they're folks who kind of, because in this world of education, sometimes it gets like you start wondering, am I having an impact? The things that I do now, when am I going to know that they're having an impact? And when I talk to some folks like you, who our relationship, we can go back almost about 20
Yeah.
years, So when I met you, and I think educators need to understand that is that you may not see it the day after, the week after, the month after, keep putting in the work because the seeds that you're planting and believing in young people, this is what it will bring. You know, because this is what's in you. These are the things that are in you all. So it's like I'm blown away. You know, and I've learned so much today from you. Is there anything, you know, as we begin to, you know, wrap, we're coming up on an hour, and we could talk forever. I just feel like we could just, you know, there's so many things we didn't even get
Yeah.
to. But is there anything that's on your heart? You know, is there anything that's on your mind that you kind of want to talk about, or let folks know about?
So I really just, I want to just say that to everybody who's listening or anybody who is going to watch this, like, to think about some of the things that we have talked about and really start to check in with yourself and raise that self-awareness, and really start to have these conversations. One of the shirts that we have right now is our I'm fine shirt, right? So I started that with the intention of, okay, when we ask somebody how they're doing, it's always, I'm fine, I'm all right.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be so much more going on. So what if I asked you, okay, how are you really feeling? And then there's so much more that comes out of that conversation, but we have to be willing to take that step further. So really start to have these conversations about mental health. Talk to your kids, talk to the adults in your life. I know that some of us grew up in households where mental health was not a thing, and I keep saying a
Mm.
thing because that's how we grew up. In some households it's like, no, just get over it, you'll get through it. But there's really some hard things and some hard concepts to get past when it comes to mental health. So really check in with yourself and take care of yourself and take care of each other.
So I'm sorry, but we can't leave now because listen, you see, you keep dropping all these like, because I ask my kids and I'll say, you know, how was your day? It was good. And that's it.
Hmm.
And it's like, how you feeling? I'm fine, just like you said.
Hmm.
But there's so much more beneath.
Yeah.
So how, I'm gonna ask you one more time, you know, how do you like how do you dig deeper? Because to me, that's what you're telling me, is that we have to dig deeper and not just take it on the surface of like when you hear someone say, "Oh, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good." Because think about that in our community, period, Jessenia,
Yeah.
right? When people say, "Oh, I'm good," you know, that then transformed to, "Oh, I'm good on her," which means I don't mess with her like
Right.
that. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So like you really gotta like break it all the way down. When people are saying I'm good, it can have like what does it really mean? And how do we start digging deeper into, you know, are you really good? You know, and it's funny because when you think of it, then the phrase did come, what's really
Yeah.
good? So that's just proven in our culture that it started off as, oh, I'm good. But then people begin to realize you ain't really
Right.
good. So then people start saying, yo, what's really good? So I guess my question now to you is like, how do we get to like to that question of like what's really good with people? Like, how do we engage folks in that kind of like conversation of really getting deep?
I think it's important to ask the follow up questions and be willing to listen. A lot of times we'll see somebody and we'll be like, "Hey, how you doing?" And before they even get a chance to say anything, we're halfway down the street.
Yeah,
So it's really about being present. And
yeah.
so if I'm asking you, "Hey, like, how are you?" I'm fine. Are you really fine? You know, how has this week been for you? And asking those like more questions to really dig deeper, because some people will say I'm fine, but then you ask them, okay, how are you really? Oh, this week was tough. Okay, what
Mm-hmm.
happened? What was tough about it? Do you want to talk about it? And if they say, yeah, I would love to talk about it, thank you for listening, that that's how you really start to dig deeper. But I also think, like, as a community, we have to start talking about it more. We have to start talking about mental health a lot more, because yes, there's been great strides in the mental health community, but there's still a lot of things that have not gotten better. There's still that stigma attached to it. And, one thing I would love for people to do is stop using the word crazy when it comes to defining mental health. You're not crazy. You're just going through something. Life is stressful. That doesn't classify you as crazy. And I think that negative connotation changes the way we have these conversations.
I think that that's a good that stop using the word crazy. When we grew up, we had identified in our neighborhood the crazy man,
Mm-hmm.
the crazy lady. We listen, and I remember quick story. We were growing up. We were walking home from Leonard Conroe School, and we were walking to Grant Court, and we used to throw rocks at the crazy lady's house.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, this lady, and she used to, if anybody's familiar with Long Branch, on Seaview Avenue, across the street, it's not there anymore. There was a corner store on Seaview Avenue. Across the street from that corner store was this big gray house. And if you walked from Leonard Conroe back then, you threw rocks at that house, right? So we threw rocks. One day, Jessenia, the lady, came out. We never seen anyone come out of that house before. She came out of the house and she didn't chase us. She walked behind us all the way to my grandmother's house, who lived in Grand Court. So we ran into my grandmother's house. This is a true story, right? We was like fourth grade, fifth grade. My grandmother lets us in, but then she sees the lady, and she's like, invites the lady into our house to have tea.
Mm-hmm.
And we were saying to my grandma, "You can't let her in. She the crazy. That's the crazy lady, right?" Long story short, like all of the kids start forming around the outside of the house, looking at this lady inside of our house, who we thought was the crazy lady, sitting down having tea. The lady finished, never said a word to us, talked to my grandmother, left. It began to change my whole perspective as an elementary student of like, yo, they're real people. These are real people who we are calling the crazy lady. And, I don't know what made my grandmother do that. My grandmother never had no schooling, no education, no like, emotion. I'm using my emotional intelligence. There was love in her, is what it came down to. And invited that woman into the house, had tea with her, changed my life, changed my life. So I agree with you, getting those words out of our lexicon or out of our
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary and ceasing to use them.
Words are important.
Jessenia, yeah, listen, words are like words, they're so
Yeah.
powerful. They're so powerful, in the way that we form things in our head. You are definitely family to the show,
Thank you. Thank you
Jessenia.
for
And
having me on.
listen, no, it's thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And I'm very honored to have known you. And I'm very proud of the work and I'm encouraged. Forget about proud. I'm encouraged by the work that you're doing, because the work that you're doing is making me say, how can I do more? So, I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing out in the communities, and I hope that folks are hearing this and finding ways of how can we get your program into our schools. And I know I'm already thinking about how I could do it, and talking to into our children. So, we really appreciate you, Purpose and Practice.
Thank you so
We
much.
appreciate, yes, what you're doing, and we love you for it. So thank you very much. To the folks out who tuned in, you had a lot of folks tuning in, and giving up a lot of chat, a lot of stuff up in the chat. Thank you for all of your support. We love you all too. And until next time, we're going to say peace out. And Jessenia, keep doing all of the work that you're doing out there in the community, and stay
All
encouraged.
right. Thank you.
Peace
Thank you
out.
so much.